I am 26 years old, and for my entire life, I have been the responsible daughter, the sensible one, the one who never asked for too much. My sister, Chloe, is 2 years older. She is the beautiful one, the charming one, the one who always got what she wanted. My parents made sure of it. They orbited her like she was the sun, and I was just a small, distant planet in their solar system. I had made my peace with it, or so I thought. The line was crossed 2 weeks after Chloe's wedding. It had been an extravagant affair, a fairy tale brought to life. There was a historic mansion with sprawling gardens, a dress that cost more than my car, and a guest list filled with people meant to impress her new, wealthy in-laws. The final bill, as my mother had proudly whispered to a cousin, was $45,000. My parents had beamed the entire night, soaking in the reflected glory of their perfect daughter's perfect day. I had smiled, toasted the happy couple, and even shed a tear during the vows, playing my part as the supportive little sister. Then, 2 weeks later, they called me into the living room. My father, a man whose posture usually radiated pride, looked slumped and gray. My mother sat beside him, twisting a handkerchief in her hands. The air was thick with a strange, manufactured gravity. I sat on the armchair opposite them, a familiar feeling of dread coiling in my stomach. This was the same setup they used when they needed something. My father cleared his throat. "Anna, your mother and I need to talk to you about something serious." I waited. I knew better than to speak first. "The wedding was more expensive than we anticipated," my mother began, her voice wavering with practiced fragility. "We wanted to give Chloe the best, you know how it is. It was her special day." I nodded slowly, my eyes fixed on a loose thread on the sofa cushion. I knew exactly how it was. Chloe's special days had been the organizing principle of our family for as long as I could remember. "We're in a bit of a bind," my father cut in, his tone impatient. "A temporary one, of course. But we need to tighten our belts for a while. And we need you to do your part." Here it comes, I thought. They probably wanted me to forego the small amount of rent I paid them for the little cottage behind their main house. I had lived there for 4 years, ever since I graduated from college and started my job as a librarian. I paid my own bills, bought my own food, and paid them $300 a month, a sum they had set and which I had never missed. It was my contribution, my way of showing gratitude for having a place to live while I saved up for a down payment on my own. "Of course," I said. "I can help out more with groceries, or if you need to pause the rent for a few months, I understand." My mother shook her head, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. "No, Anna. It's more serious than that." My father leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. He looked me straight in the eye, and the casual disregard in his gaze hit me like a physical blow. "We need you to cover the mortgage on the main house." I stared at him, certain I had misheard. "The mortgage? You mean your mortgage?" "Yes, our mortgage," he said, as if I were being deliberately obtuse. "It's $1,600 a month. We've run the numbers. With your salary, you can afford it if you're careful." The room tilted.
$1,600.
That was more than half of my take-home pay. It would wipe out my savings, my ability to live, my future. I can't afford that," I stammered. "That's everything I make. I have my own bills. My car payment. Student loans." "You have student loans because you chose to go to a state university," my mother said, her voice turning sharp. "We paid for Chloe's private college outright. You've had it easy, living in the cottage for next to nothing. It's time you stepped up and took on some real responsibility. We are your parents. We are in need." The injustice of her words was breathtaking. They paid for Chloe's education because Chloe had wanted the experience of a prestigious school. I went to a state school and worked 2 jobs because I knew they wouldn't, or couldn't, do the same for me. I had tried not to be resentful. I had told myself it was just practical. But hearing her use my responsible choice as a weapon against me made something inside me fracture. "You spent $45,000 on a party," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "A party? And now you want me to pay for your house?" "It was not a party," my mother snapped. "It was a wedding. For your sister." It was a necessary expense. We had to maintain a certain standard for Liam's family. So, you're telling me that maintaining a standard for your new in-laws is more important than my ability to eat? I asked, the shock giving way to a cold, rising anger. My father stood up, his face hardening. He was done with the discussion. This was not a negotiation. It was a decree. This is not up for debate, Anna. You are part of this family, and you will contribute. You will start paying the mortgage on the 1st of next month. If you refuse, you will have 30 days to vacate the cottage. He delivered the ultimatum with the flat, unfeeling finality of a judge passing sentence. Pay our mortgage or get out. My mother stood beside him, her expression a mask of righteous martyrdom. We've given you so much, Anna. It's the least you can do. I looked at their faces, at the two people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. I saw no concern for my well-being. I saw no regret for their own recklessness. I saw only a cold, hard calculation. They had a problem, and I was the solution. My life, my dreams, my future, they were just resources to be tapped. I felt a profound and sudden emptiness. The quiet acceptance I had cultivated for years evaporated, replaced by a chilling clarity. They didn't see me as a daughter. They saw me as a utility. I see, I said, my voice devoid of the emotion that was raging inside me. I had to stay calm. I had to think. Good, my father said, misinterpreting my quietness as compliance. We'll expect the first payment on the 1st. He turned and walked out of the room. My mother gave me one last look, a mixture of pity and triumph, before following him. I sat alone in the armchair, the silence of the house pressing in on me. They had spent a fortune to launch one daughter into a life of luxury, and now they were threatening to make the other one homeless to pay for it. The shock began to recede, and something else took its place. It was a feeling I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a very long time. It was pure, undiluted anger. And in that moment, sitting in the wreckage of my family, I made a silent promise to myself. They had made their move. Now I would make mine. I was not going to be their safety net. I was not going to let them ruin my life for their mistakes. I would find a way to fight back. And I would win. The next morning, I woke up with a headache and a heart full of stones. The ultimatum echoed in my mind, each word a separate, stinging slap. Pay our mortgage, or get out. It was so simple, so brutal. I made coffee, my hands shaking slightly. I looked out the window of my small cottage. It was a cozy place, just a bedroom, a small living area, and a kitchen. I had painted the walls myself, a soft sage green. I had planted a garden of herbs by the door. It was my sanctuary, the one place where I was not Chloe's little sister, but just Anna. The thought of being forced out of it, of having to pack up my life because of their irresponsibility, was nauseating. I called my best friend, Maya. She was a paralegal at a downtown law firm, fiercely logical and entirely unsentimental about family dynamics. I told her everything, my voice flat and monotone as I recounted the conversation. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, Maya exploded. Are you kidding me? They did what? Anna, that's not just unfair, it's insane. They can't do that. They can, Maya, I said, sinking onto my tiny sofa. They own the cottage. I'm just a tenant. They can evict me. With 30 days' notice. Yes, but on what grounds? For refusing to be their personal ATM? You pay your rent. You have a verbal contract. This is retaliation, she fumed. And the sheer nerve of it. To spend that much on a wedding. 45 grand? Anna, that's not just we overspent a little. That's a catastrophic financial decision for people who can't afford their own mortgage. Her outrage was a balm on my own raw nerves. It was validating to hear someone else confirm that I wasn't the crazy one. That's what I thought, I said. It doesn't add up. My dad is an accountant. He's always been so meticulous, so obsessed with budgets and numbers. For him to miscalculate this badly, it feels wrong. It is wrong, Maya insisted. Something else is going on here. People like your dad don't just accidentally spend themselves into ruin. Not unless there was no ruin to begin with, and they just think you're a fool. A thought surfaced, something I had pushed aside during the wedding preparations. A few months before the big day, I had overheard my parents talking in the kitchen. I was coming in from the garden, and they hadn't heard me. My mom had been fretting about the cost of the caterer Chloe wanted. "Don't worry about it, Claire," my dad had said, his voice uncharacteristically breezy. "The windfall came through. We have more than enough to give her the day she deserves." A windfall. I had assumed he meant a bonus from work or a small inheritance from a distant relative they'd never mentioned. I hadn't given it much thought at the time, too busy with my own life. But now, the word echoed in my mind. Windfall. "Maya," I said slowly. "A few months ago, I heard my dad mention a windfall. He said it was enough to pay for the wedding." "A windfall?" Maya's voice sharpened with interest. "What kind of windfall? Did they win the lottery?" "I don't know. I didn't ask. I just assumed it was their business," I replied. "But if they had a sudden influx of cash, why are they broke now? Where did it all go?" 45,000 is a lot, but if the windfall was significant, it shouldn't have wiped them out completely. Not to the point of not being able to pay their own mortgage the very next month. "Exactly," Maya said. "This stinks, Anna. It stinks to high heaven. They're either lying about being broke to manipulate you, or they're telling the truth, which means that windfall wasn't what you think it was, or it came with strings attached." We were both silent for a moment, the implications hanging between us. "What do I do?" I asked, feeling a fresh wave of helplessness. "You don't agree to anything," Maya said firmly. "You stall. You tell them you need to review your finances. You buy yourself time. And while you're buying time, you start digging. You need to find out what that windfall was. Where did that money come from? And where did it go? The answer is there somewhere. Your parents have a paper trail. Your dad's an accountant, for crying out loud. He lives by the paper trail." Her words gave me a flicker of hope, a sense of direction. She was right. I couldn't fight them without information. Right now, they held all the cards. They had the power to make me homeless. I needed to find some cards of my own. "Okay," I said, my voice stronger now. "Okay, I can do that. I'll stall them." "And Anna?" Maya added, her voice softening slightly. "Don't let them make you feel guilty. This is not your fault. They made their bed, and now they want you to lie in it with them. Don't do it." "I won't," I promised. I felt a knot of resolve tighten in my chest. This was no longer just about saving my home. It was about uncovering the truth. After the call, I felt a shift inside me. The hurt and shock were still there, but they were now overlaid with a cold, clear purpose. I was no longer just a victim of my parents' whims. I was an investigator. My first step was to understand my own position. I went to my desk and pulled out a small, unassuming ledger. I had started it when I first moved into the cottage. In it, I had meticulously recorded every rent payment I had made to my parents. $300 a month for 48 months. I did the math. $14,400. I stared at the number. It wasn't a fortune, but it wasn't nothing. It was a significant amount of money that I had handed over, on time, without fail. The narrative my mother was spinning, that I had been living here for next to nothing, was a deliberate distortion. I had been a reliable source of income for them. My next step was to probe, just as Maya had suggested. I needed to see how they would react to a gentle pushback. I waited until that evening, then walked over to the main house. I found my father in his study, a room that had always intimidated me with its dark wood and shelves of leather-bound books. He was at his desk, staring at a stack of bills. I knocked softly on the doorframe. "Dad, can I talk to you for a minute?" He looked up, his expression weary and annoyed. "What is it, Anna?" "I'm Busse." "I've been thinking about what you asked," I began, keeping my voice calm and reasonable. "And I've looked at my budget. $1,600 just isn't possible for me. I want to help, I really do. But that amount would leave me with nothing. I wouldn't even have enough for gas to get to work." I hoped this practical appeal to logic would get through to him, the accountant. It didn't. His face darkened. Don't be dramatic. You'll make it work. You'll cut back on whatever it is you spend your money on.
Books.
Coffees. You'll manage. I'm not being dramatic, I said, my patience fraying. It's simple math. My paycheck is $2,800 a month after taxes. My student loans are $400. My car payment and insurance are $350. My phone and utilities are another $200. That leaves me with $1,850 for everything else. If I give you $1,600, I have $250 left for gas, food, and any other expense for the entire month. It's not sustainable. I had laid out the numbers for him, his native language. Surely, he could see the impossibility of his demand. He waved a dismissive hand. Numbers can be moved around. Sell your car and take the bus. Get a cheaper phone plan. Stop buying expensive groceries. There are always ways, Anna. The problem is you don't want to find them. You've had a comfortable life, and you're not willing to make a single sacrifice for your family. The accusation stung, but I held my ground. This was a test, and I couldn't afford to fail it. This isn't about a sacrifice, I said firmly. This is about my survival. I am willing to help, but I am not willing to drown. There has to be another way. What about Chloe? Can't she and Liam help? They just got all those wedding gifts. Liam has a great job. The moment I said Chloe's name, my father's face turned to stone. We are not asking Chloe, he said, his voice dangerously low. She is a newlywed. She and Liam are starting their life together. We will not burden them. This is your responsibility. Why? I asked, the question bursting out of me before I could stop it. Why is it my responsibility and not hers? We are both your daughters. Because she is not the one living in our property for a pittance, he shot back, his voice rising. We have been subsidizing your life for 4 years. Now it's time for you to pay it back. That's the end of the discussion. He turned back to his desk, a clear dismissal. The conversation was over. His refusal to even consider asking Chloe for help was the most telling part of the exchange. It wasn't about a family crisis where everyone pitched in. It was a targeted demand. They had decided I was the one who would pay, and that was that. I walked back to my cottage, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and fury. His logic was so twisted, so profoundly unfair. He had framed their support of me as a debt that I now had to repay by taking on their own financial obligations. But they had never subsidized me. I paid rent. The arrangement was mutually beneficial. They got a steady income from a property that would otherwise sit empty, and I got an affordable place to live. But the most glaring piece of information was his absolute protection of Chloe. We will not burden them. They had just spent a fortune on her, a fortune that had apparently led them to the brink of financial collapse, and yet the idea of asking her for help was unthinkable. But demanding that I sacrifice my entire livelihood was presented as a reasonable request. The conversation confirmed what I already suspected. This was not about need. It was about a fundamental, deeply ingrained imbalance in our family. And that windfall my dad had mentioned, it was becoming more and more suspicious. If they had money to burn on Chloe, why was I the one getting scorched? I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. It was time to stop asking them for answers. It was time to find them myself. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but I knew where to start. Public records, property taxes, mortgages. My dad was an accountant. He believed in order and documentation. Somewhere in the vast, digital world of official paperwork, there was a clue. And I was going to find it. My first foray into amateur investigation was clumsy. I started with the county property records website, searching for my parents' address. The site was clunky and slow, but eventually I found the listing for their house. I saw the original purchase price from 20 years ago. I saw the assessed value, the tax history, and I saw the mortgage information. There was one primary mortgage taken out when they bought the house. And then there was a second one. A home equity line of credit, or HELOC. It was taken out 5 years ago. My eyes scanned the details. The maximum credit limit was $50,000. It was a revolving line of credit, meaning they could borrow, repay, and borrow again. It was a common financial tool, but seeing it there made me uneasy. A Helic used the equity in their home as collateral. If they defaulted, the bank could foreclose. I wondered if the wedding had been paid for with this. Had they maxed out their credit line to fund Chloe's big day? It was plausible, but it didn't fully explain the windfall comment. A line of credit wasn't a windfall. It was debt. My father, the meticulous accountant, would never refer to debt as a windfall. It was the opposite of a windfall. I needed to talk to someone, but not my parents. I thought about who in our extended family might have some insight. My mother's sister, my Aunt Carol, came to mind. She and my mother were close, but Carol had always had a soft spot for me. She was more grounded, less prone to my mother's dramatic flourishes. Maybe she would know something. I called her the next day, feigning a casual tone. Aun Carol. How are you? Anna. It's so good to hear from you, sweetie. I'm doing well. How are you? I'm still recovering from that wedding. Wasn't it just spectacular? It was beautiful. I agreed, gritting my teeth. Actually, that's sort of why I'm calling. Mom and Dad seem a little stressed out. I'm worried about them. The wedding must have been a huge expense. There was a slight pause. Well, your mother did go a bit overboard, Carol said carefully. She wanted everything to be perfect for Chloe. You know how she is. I do, I said. I want to make sure they're okay, financially. Mom mentioned they had to dip into some savings. I hope they didn't do anything reckless. This was my shot. I was hoping she would offer some piece of information, some clue. Aunt Carol sighed. It was a heavy, weary sound. Oh, Anna. Your parents, they do things their own way. Your mother was so excited. She told me not to worry about the cost. She said your father had handled it. Something about an early inheritance from your grandparents' estate. She said they had decided to use it to give Chloe the wedding she deserved. The words hit me like a ton of bricks. An early inheritance from your grandparents' estate. My mother's parents, my Grandma Rose and Grandpa Joe, had passed away 3 years ago. They hadn't been wealthy, but they were comfortable. They owned their home and had a modest portfolio of stocks and bonds. They had always been scrupulously fair with me and Chloe. The idea that they would have left money in a way that my parents could access and spend on just one of us felt completely wrong. It went against everything I knew about them. An inheritance? I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. I didn't know there was anything left. I thought it was all settled when they passed. Well, that's what your mother called it, Carol said. She was a bit vague on the details. You know Claire. She hears what she wants to hear. But she was very clear that the money was there, and it was for the girls. For the girls. Plural. Not just for Chloe. Thank you, Aunt Carol, I said, my mind racing. That actually makes me feel a bit better. If they had some extra money, then maybe they're not in as much trouble as I thought. I was lying, of course. I felt 1,000 times worse. I'm sure they'll be fine, sweetie, she said warmly. They're resilient. And they have you. You're such a good daughter. The irony of her words was like acid. A good daughter. Was that what I was? Or was I just a convenient resource they had decided to plunder? After the call, I sat in stunned silence. The pieces were starting to form a terrifying picture. The windfall my father mentioned. The early inheritance my aunt mentioned. The money was from my grandparents. And it was meant for the girls. For me and Chloe. They hadn't just overspent on a wedding. They had taken money that was, at least in part, mine, and they had spent it all on my sister. And now, having exhausted that fund, they were coming after my salary. It wasn't just irresponsibility. It was a profound betrayal, a theft that had been hidden under the guise of parental love and generosity. The anger I had felt before was nothing compared to the cold fury that now settled in my bones. This was no longer just about fairness. This was about justice. They had stolen from me, and they were going to pay it back. I went back to my laptop, my fingers flying across the keyboard. My grandparents' names. Their county of residence. Probate court records. I wasn't a paralegal like Maya, but I was a librarian. I knew how to research. I knew how to follow a trail of information until it led to the source. The probate court website was more user-friendly than the property records site. I entered my grandfather's name and his date of death. A case file appeared. I clicked on it, my heart hammering against my ribs. There were dozens of scanned documents. The will, letters of administration, inventories of assets. I started clicking, downloading, reading. Most of it was standard legal jargon. But then I found it. A document titled Testamentary Trust Agreement. I opened the PDF, and the words blurred in front of my eyes. The will stipulated that after all debts were paid, the remainder of their estate was to be placed into a trust. My parents, Claire and Thomas, were named as the trustees, and the beneficiaries were named clearly, our beloved granddaughters, Chloe and Anna, in equal shares. The terms were explicit. The trust was to be managed by my parents for our health, education, and support. The principal could be distributed, but only for significant life events and with the full knowledge and consent of both beneficiaries. The trust was set to dissolve and the remaining assets be distributed to us in equal shares on my 30th birthday. I was 26. The trust should still be active. There should still be money in it. My money. I scrolled down, my hands trembling. I was looking for the inventory of assets, the document that would list exactly what was put into the trust. I found it. There was the value of their house, which had been sold. There were the stock portfolios, the bonds, the cash in their savings accounts. I scrolled to the bottom line, the total value that had been used to fund the trust. $220,000. I felt the air leave my lungs. $220,000. To be split between me and Chloe. $110,000 each. That was my inheritance. My future. A down payment on a house. A chance to be free of student debt. A life raft. And my parents had it. They were the trustees. They were the gatekeepers. The windfall was not a bonus. It was our inheritance. The early inheritance wasn't a gift. It was an advance they had given themselves from our money. They had taken a fund that was meant to secure both of their daughters' futures and had lavished it on one and one alone. And they had done it in secret. I felt sick. This was so much worse than I could have ever imagined. They hadn't just been unfair. They had committed a monstrous breach of trust. They had violated their fiduciary duty. They had, in essence, stolen $110,000 from me. And then, with the audacity of seasoned criminals, they had demanded I pay their mortgage. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it was staggering. They had spent my future on a party for my sister, and now they wanted my present, too. They wanted to bleed me dry from every possible angle. The hurt was so deep, so profound, it felt like a physical wound. These were my parents, the people who were supposed to protect me. Instead, they had plundered my inheritance and were now threatening me with homelessness. The image of them at the wedding, beaming with pride, flashed in my mind. They weren't proud of Chloe. They were proud of the show they had put on, a show they had paid for with my money. My sadness curdled into something hard and sharp. There would be no more quiet acceptance. There would be no more trying to keep the peace. The peace was a lie. My entire relationship with them had been built on a foundation of deceit and exploitation. I closed the laptop. I needed a plan. A real plan. This was beyond just stalling for time. This was now about recovering what was mine and holding them accountable. The documents I had found were a start, but they weren't enough. I needed to know the current status of the trust. I needed proof of what they had spent. And for that, I needed more than just a public record search. I needed a professional. My mind immediately went to one person. A name from my grandparents' documents. The lawyer who had drafted their will and set up the trust. A man named Mr. Henderson. His office was in the next town over. I picked up my phone. I was done being the victim. It was time to build my case. I would not let them get away with this. Not now. Not ever. The game had changed. They thought they were in control, that they held all the power. They were about to find out how wrong they were. The next day, I called Mr. Henderson's office. His secretary was a pleasant woman with a crisp, professional voice. I explained that I was Anna, the granddaughter of his former clients, Rose and Joe. I told her I had some questions about my grandparents' estate and wanted to schedule a consultation for some personal financial planning. I was careful not to mention my parents or any conflict. I needed to get in the door without raising any alarms. She scheduled an appointment for me for the following week. Waiting for that appointment was one of the longest weeks of my life. I went to work at the library, shelving books and helping patrons, my mind a million miles away. Every interaction with my parents was fraught with a new, terrible tension. I avoided them as much as possible, making excuses about being busy with work. When I did see them, their greetings were clipped, their eyes cold. The ultimatum hung in the air between us, an unspoken threat. One evening, my mother cornered me as I was walking from my car to the cottage. "Anna, your father tells me you're being difficult about the mortgage." "I'm not being difficult, Mom," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "I'm being realistic. I cannot afford it." "It's not about what you can afford," she said, her voice rising in that familiar, manipulative way. "It's about what you're willing to do for your family. We are in trouble, and you're quibbling over numbers." I never thought you could be so selfish. The word selfish was so absurd, so completely backward, that I almost laughed. They had stolen over $100,000 from me, and I was the selfish one for not wanting to hand over my entire salary. "I'm sorry you feel that way," I said, turning to unlock my cottage door. It was a non-apology, and she knew it. "The first of the month is in 2 weeks, Anna," she called after me as I stepped inside. "You need to decide where your loyalties lie." I closed the door, my hand shaking. My loyalties. For my entire life, my loyalty had been to them, to the family unit they had defined. I had played by their rules, accepted their hierarchy, but my loyalty had been rewarded with betrayal. My loyalty now was to myself, and to the memory of my grandparents who had wanted to provide for me, not to fund my sister's extravagant lifestyle. During that week, I also did something else. I called my sister. I needed to know how much she knew. Was she an active participant in this, or was she just the blissfully ignorant beneficiary? "Hey, Chloe," I said when she answered. "How's married life?" "Oh, Anna, it's amazing," she gushed. "Liam is just the best. We're still going through all our gifts. People were so generous." "That's great," I said. "Listen, I have a weird question for you. Do you remember Grandma and Grandpa's will? Anything about a trust fund?" There was a pause. It was just a beat too long. "A trust fund?" she repeated, her voice a little too casual. "Vaguely. I think Mom and Dad mentioned something about it once." "Why?" "Oh, no reason," I said lightly. "I was just going through some old papers, and it got me thinking. Mom and Dad seem really stressed about money after the wedding. I was just wondering if that trust money was used for it." Another pause. This one was even more telling. I think so," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Mom said they were using our inheritance to make the day special. She said it was what Grandma and Grandpa would have wanted. Our inheritance." She had said our. She knew the money was for both of us. "And you were okay with that?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "With them spending all of it on your wedding?" "Well, it wasn't all of it, was it?" she said defensively. "And it was my wedding, Anna. It was a once-in-a-lifetime thing. You'll get your turn someday." The casual dismissal, the assumption that my turn would be equally funded, was the final nail in the coffin of our sisterly bond. She knew. She might not have known the exact numbers, or the fraudulent way they were going about it, but she knew the money was meant for both of us, and she had happily accepted it all for herself. She was not an innocent bystander. She was an accomplice. "Right," I said, a cold finality in my tone. "My turn. I have to go, Chloe. Talk to you later." I hung up before she could reply. The betrayal was now complete. It wasn't just my parents. It was my entire family. They had conspired, either actively or passively, to strip me of my financial security for their own selfish desires. Chloe got her dream wedding, and my parents got to play the role of doting, generous providers. And I was expected to foot the bill for the aftermath. The day of my appointment with Mr. Henderson finally arrived. I dressed in my most professional outfit, a simple black dress and blazer. I felt like I was preparing for battle. His office was in a stately old brick building on a tree-lined street. It was quiet and smelled of old paper and lemon polish. Mr. Henderson was an older gentleman with kind eyes and a firm handshake. He looked exactly like the sort of person my scrupulous grandfather would have trusted. He led me into his office, a room that looked much like my father's study, but felt welcoming instead of intimidating. "Miss, it's a pleasure to meet you," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "Your grandmother, Rose, was a wonderful woman. I was very fond of them both. Now, how can I help you?" I took a deep breath. "Mr. Henderson, I'm here because I have some concerns about the testamentary trust my grandparents established. The one my parents are trustees of." His expression became guarded. "I see. What are your concerns?" "I have reason to believe that the funds in the trust have been misappropriated," I said, choosing my words carefully. "My parents recently spent a very large sum of money on my sister's wedding, and I've been led to believe that money came from the trust. The entire trust." Mr. Henderson steepled his fingers, his kind eyes now sharp and focused. "The terms of the trust are very specific. Any significant distributions for one beneficiary would require the consent of the other. Have you given your consent for any such distributions, Anna?" "No," I said, my voice firm. "I have never been consulted. I was not even officially aware of the trust's specific value or terms until I did my own research last week." A flicker of something, displeasure, concern, crossed his face. He swiveled in his chair and typed something into his computer. He was silent for a long moment, reading whatever was on his screen. The only sound in the room was the soft click of his keyboard. "This is highly irregular," he said finally, turning back to me. "As a beneficiary, you should have been receiving annual statements." "I have never received a single statement," I confirmed. He looked deeply troubled. He typed again, his brow furrowed. "Anna, according to my records here, the trust was dissolved 3 months ago." My blood ran cold. "Dissolved?
How?"
"It was supposed to continue until I'm 30-inch. A trust can be dissolved early if all beneficiaries and trustees agree," he explained, his voice grave. "My office received a signed and notarized document, a trust dissolution and final distribution agreement. It stated that the full remaining balance of the trust was to be distributed directly to the trustees, your parents, to be used at their discretion for family needs. The document was signed by your mother, your father, your sister, and by you." I stared at him, my mind unable to process his words. "By me? I never signed anything. I never even saw such a document. The signature on the document is purported to be yours," he said gently. He turned his monitor toward me. And there it was, a scanned image of the document. And at the bottom, for signatures, my mother's looping script, my father's sharp, angular signature, Chloe's flowery, embellished one, and then a clumsy, awkward forgery of my own name. It was close enough to pass a casual glance, but I could see the subtle hesitation in the lines, the slight difference in the slant. It was not my signature. "That's not me," I whispered, a wave of nausea washing over me. "They forged my signature." Mr. Henderson looked at me, his expression grim. He had seen enough in his long career to know when someone was telling the truth. "I believe you," he said quietly. "And if what you're saying is true, this is not just a breach of trust. This is fraud, a criminal offense." He swiveled his monitor back and clicked a few more times. The final distribution was for the full remaining balance of the trust, $207,000. So they had spent some of it over the years, probably on Chloe's private college. And the rest, the vast majority of it, they had taken in one lump sum. "They told me they were broke," I said, the words catching in my throat. "They spent $45,000 on the wedding, and they said they were broke. They demanded I pay their mortgage or they would evict me." Mr. Henderson's face, which had been grave, now hardened into anger. He was no longer just a lawyer reviewing a file. He was the protector of his deceased client's wishes, and he was witnessing them being desecrated. They took $200,000, spent a fraction of it, and are now trying to extort your salary? He asked, his voice laced with disbelief and disgust. Yes, I said. He was silent for a full minute, his jaw tight. He looked from the screen to me, and I saw a decision being made in his eyes. He was no longer a neutral party.
He was my ally.
Anna, he said, his voice firm and clear. What your parents have done is illegal and morally reprehensible. We have several avenues we can pursue. We can file a civil suit to recover your half of the funds. We can also report the fraud to the district attorney's office, which could lead to criminal charges. He paused, letting the weight of those words sink in. However, he continued, legal proceedings can be long, expensive, and emotionally draining. Given the ultimatum they have given you, we might consider a more direct approach first. What kind of approach? I asked, my heart starting to beat faster. You have undeniable leverage now, he explained. You have proof of a crime for which they could face serious consequences, including jail time. Your father, as an accountant, would lose his license and his career. The public shame would be devastating for them. We can use that leverage to force a settlement. One that not only recovers what is owed to you, but also resolves your immediate housing crisis. A plan began to form in my mind, sharp and clear. It was audacious, but after everything they had done, I felt no hesitation. The cottage I live in, I said. It's on their property, but it's a separate structure with its own address. They own it outright. There's no mortgage on it. I had looked that up, too. Okay, Mr. Henderson said, nodding slowly, seeing where I was going. My half of the trust was $110,000 originally. I continued, my voice gaining strength. Let's say my half of the final distribution was about $103,000. The assessed value of the cottage is $95,000. Mr. Henderson smiled, a thin, grim smile. I see. You're not just looking for your money back. You're looking for a home. They gave me an ultimatum, I said, my voice like ice. Pay their mortgage or get out. I'm going to give them a counteroffer. They will sign the deed to the cottage over to me, free and clear. In exchange for the house, I will consider my portion of the stolen trust money repaid. And I will agree not to press criminal charges. He leaned back in his chair, studying me. That is a very elegant solution, Anna. It's clean. It gives you immediate security and a tangible asset. It forces them to face a direct and fitting consequence for their actions. They wanted me to pay for a house, I said. Now they can give me one. It's a strong move, he cautioned. They will not react well. They will be angry. They will be vicious. I'm counting on it, I said. But they're trapped, aren't they? It's either give me the house or face the district attorney. Given the choice between public humiliation and prison, and quietly signing over a property they already treat as separate from their own, what do you think they'll choose? Mr. Henderson nodded, a look of grudging admiration in his eyes. I think you already know the answer to that. I will have my office draft a settlement agreement and a quitclaim deed. All you need to do is get them to sign. I stood up, feeling a sense of power I had never known before. The scared, hurt girl who had sat in her parents' living room 2 weeks ago was gone. In her place was a woman who had been pushed too far and was now ready to push back. Thank you, Mr. Henderson, I said, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, reassuring. Thank you for believing me. I'm not just believing you, Anna, he said, his voice low and serious. I'm helping you carry out your grandparents' wishes. They wanted you to be secure. We're just making sure that happens. I walked out of his office and into the bright afternoon sun. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel dread. I didn't feel helpless. I felt a cold, calm certainty. I had the truth. I had the proof. And I had a plan. It was time to call a family meeting. I drove home in a state of hyper-awareness. Every traffic light, every passing car, seemed strangely vivid. The world felt sharp and clear, as if a fog had lifted. The knowledge I now possessed was a heavy weight, but also a powerful shield. I was no longer operating in the dark. I knew exactly what they had done, and I knew how I was going to make it right. When I got back to the cottage, I didn't hesitate. I picked up my phone and sent a group text to my parents and Chloe. I need to have a family meeting to discuss the mortgage situation and my decision. Please come over to my cottage tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. Liam should come too. I included Chloe's new husband, Liam, deliberately. He was an unknown factor, but he was now part of the family. He had benefited from the wedding, and he needed to be present for the fallout. More importantly, his presence would change the dynamic. My parents and Chloe might be able to present a united front against me in private, but having an outsider there, Chloe's husband, would make them more conscious of appearances. The replies came quickly. My mother. Of course, dear. We'll be there. I'm glad you've decided to be sensible. Chloe, 7 is a bit late. We were going to go out. Can we do it earlier? I typed back a single, firm reply to Chloe. Number 7 p.m. is the only time that works. She replied with a simple fine. My father didn't reply at all, which was typical. He would just show up, expecting my capitulation. The next 24 hours were a strange mixture of anxiety and resolve. I went to work, but I was just going through the motions. I spent my lunch break at my desk, reviewing the documents Mr. Henderson had emailed me. There was a draft of the settlement agreement, written in stark, unforgiving legalese. It detailed the fraudulent dissolution of the trust, the forged signature, and the proposed resolution, the transfer of the cottage property in exchange for releasing all civil and criminal claims. He had also attached a copy of the quitclaim deed, ready to be signed and notarized. Seeing it all laid out in official documents made it feel real, and my determination hardened. That evening, I prepared my cottage as if it were a stage. I cleaned obsessively, arranging the few pieces of furniture to create a clear confrontation space. I placed 4 chairs in a small circle in the middle of my living room. I made a pot of coffee, a mundane act that felt strangely calming. I was the host. This was my space. The meeting would happen on my terms. At exactly 7 p.m., there was a knock on the door. I opened it to find all 4 of them standing on my small porch. My father looked impatient. My mother had a look of strained benevolence on her face, as if she were a queen visiting the humble dwellings of a subject. Chloe looked bored, and Liam, her husband, looked slightly uncomfortable, a polite smile fixed on his face. He was tall and handsome, and he had the easy confidence of someone who had never faced a real problem in his life. Come in, I said, my voice even. They filed into the small space, their presence immediately making it feel crowded. My father surveyed my living room with a critical eye. Chloe wrinkled her nose slightly, as if the air was somehow substandard. Well, this is cozy, she commented, a backhanded compliment if I'd ever heard one. It is, I said, not rising to the bait. Please have a seat. They sat, my parents on my small love seat, Chloe and Liam in the 2 armchairs I had borrowed from the library staff room. I remained standing. I wanted the physical advantage of height. I wanted them to have to look up at me. Thank you all for coming. I began, my voice steady. I know you're expecting a decision from me about the mortgage. We are, my father said curtly. This has gone on long enough. Have you come to your senses? I have, I said. I've come to my senses completely. And I've spent the last 2 weeks doing a lot of thinking and a lot of research. My mother shifted uncomfortably. Research? Anna, this is a simple family matter. There's no need for research. Oh, I think there is, I said, my eyes locking onto hers. Because this isn't a simple family matter, is it? It's a financial matter. And as Dad always taught me, it's important to have all the facts before making a major financial decision. I saw a flicker of apprehension in my father's eyes. He didn't like where this was going. Liam was looking back and forth between us, his polite smile faltering as he sensed the tension. I've reviewed my budget as you asked. I continued, my gaze moving to my father. And I confirmed that I cannot, under any circumstances, afford to pay your $1,600 mortgage. Then you know what the alternative is, he snapped, his temper flaring. This is our property. You have 30 days. We can talk about the property in a minute, I said, holding up a hand. Because in the course of my research, I discovered some other interesting financial information. I discovered that you're not actually in the desperate situation you've described. A dead silence fell over the room. Chloe stopped looking bored and was now watching me with narrowed eyes. What are you talking about? My mother demanded, her voice shrill. I'm talking about the windfall, I said, letting the word hang in the air. The one Dad mentioned before the wedding. The one you told Aunt Carol was an early inheritance. The money from Grandma and Grandpa's estate. My father went rigid. My mother's face paled. That money was for us to manage for the family, my father said, his voice low and threatening. For the family? I repeated, a humorless smile touching my lips. That's not what the trust agreement said. I found that, too, in the probate court records. Funny how much information is publicly available if you know where to look. The agreement said the trust was for your beloved granddaughters, Chloe and Anna, in equal shares. Chloe's head whipped around to look at our parents. Liam looked utterly confused. A trust? He asked Chloe quietly. It's nothing, she muttered, but her eyes were fixed on me. It's not nothing, Chloe, I said, my voice cutting through the tension. It was $220,000 originally. Our money, our inheritance, our future. And you, I said, pointing a finger at my parents, were the trustees. You had a legal, fiduciary duty to protect that money for both of us. We did what we thought was best, my mother cried, finding her voice. We gave Chloe a beautiful wedding, something to launch her new life. You gave Chloe a party, I corrected her, my voice turning to ice. You gave her a party using my money. You took my half, $110,000, and you spent it on flowers and a fancy dress for my sister. You stole my future to pay for her present. We did not steal, my father roared, jumping to his feet. How dare you use that word? I dare, because it's the truth. I shot back, my own voice rising to meet his. And it gets worse. Because you didn't just misuse the funds. You committed a crime to get them. I let that accusation settle in the suffocating silence of the room. Liam was now staring at my parents with a look of dawning horror. Chloe looked like she was going to be sick. I have a copy of the trust dissolution agreement, I said, my voice dropping back to a lethal calm. The one you filed 3 months ago to drain the last $207,000 out of the account. The one that required signatures from both beneficiaries. The one that has a very clumsy, very obvious forgery of my signature at the bottom. My father's face, which had been red with anger, was now ashen. He sank back onto the love seat, as if his legs could no longer support him. My mother just stared at me, her mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish out of water. I spoke to Mr. Henderson. I continued, pressing my advantage. He was very interested to hear that I had never seen, let alone signed, that document. He explained to me that forging a signature on a legal document to fraudulently access trust funds isn't just a family disagreement. It's a felony, one that carries significant prison time. And for an accountant like you, Dad, it means the end of your career, the loss of your license, total public disgrace. I looked at each of them in turn. My father, defeated. My mother, terrified. Chloe, horrified, now looking at her parents with dawning betrayal. And Liam. Liam looked like he had just discovered the beautiful, perfect family he had married into were common criminals. So, I said, my voice soft but clear, we find ourselves at an impasse. You have given me an ultimatum. Now, I'm going to give you 1 inch. I walked over to my small desk and picked up the folder Mr. Henderson had prepared. I walked back to the center of the room and held it up. You want me to pay the mortgage on your house? That's not going to happen. You want me to get out of my home? That's not going to happen either. Here's what is going to happen. In this folder is a settlement agreement. It states that in exchange for the approximately $100,000 you stole from my share of the trust, you are going to sign over the deed to this cottage to me. It will be my property, free and clear. You will also sign a document legally absolving me of any and all future financial responsibility for you, for any reason, forever. I paused, letting them absorb the terms. You will sign these papers tonight. I have a mobile notary on standby. She's waiting for my call a block away. Once you sign, I will consider the debt settled. I will have my home, and you will have my silence. I will not go to the district attorney. I will not file a civil suit. The matter will be closed. I dropped the folder onto the coffee table in front of them. That is my offer. My father stared at the folder as if it were a venomous snake. My mother started to sob, not tears of remorse, but tears of self-pity. Anna, how could you do this to us? We're your parents. We love you. No, I said, my voice devoid of any emotion except a vast, weary emptiness. You don't love me.
You use me.
You used my inheritance to buy my sister a fantasy, and when the money ran out, you tried to use my salary to pay your bills. That's not love. That's parasitism. This is the end of it. Chloe finally spoke, her voice a choked whisper. You would send your own parents to prison? I turned to her. Would you stand by and watch them steal from your sister and then try to make her homeless? Because you did. You knew the money was for both of us, and you took it all. You are just as guilty as they are. So don't you dare try to take the moral high ground with me. You don't have any. Chloe flinched as if I had struck her. Liam put a hand on her arm, but he didn't look at her. He was still staring at my parents with an expression of pure disgust. The perfect family was crumbling before his eyes. My father finally looked up at me, his eyes filled with a helpless, cornered rage. You're destroying this family. You're wrong, I said, my voice hard as steel. You destroyed it. You destroyed it when you decided one daughter was a princess and the other was a piggy bank. I'm just balancing the books. I picked up my phone. The notary is waiting. What's your decision? The deed to this cottage, or a call to the district attorney's office? You have 60 seconds to decide before I make the call for you. The silence in the room was absolute. My mother's sobs quieted. My father's ragged breathing was the only sound. He looked at my mother, at Chloe, at the damning folder on the table. He was trapped. He knew it. The meticulous accountant had been caught in a miscalculation, so profound it would cost him everything. And he only had one move left to make. He slowly reached out a trembling hand and pulled the folder toward him. The moments that followed were surreal. My father opened the folder and read the settlement agreement, his face a grim mask. My mother continued to weep silently beside him. Chloe stared at the floor, refusing to look at anyone. Liam had a stunned, distant expression on his face, as if he were mentally calculating how quickly he could disentangle himself from this mess. You have a pen? My father asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. I handed him one. The same pen I used to write my rent checks to him. The irony was not lost on me. He signed the document first, his signature, usually so confident, now shaky and defeated. Then he pushed it toward my mother. She looked at him, her eyes wide with panic. Thomas, we can't. Sign it, Claire, he said, his voice flat and dead. She has us. Sign it. With a trembling hand, my mother signed. I then picked up my phone and made the call.
You can come over now, I said.
5 minutes later, the mobile notary, a brisk and professional woman, was at the door. I let her in. She seemed to sense the tension in the room but ignored it. All business. I'm here to notarize some signatures on a settlement agreement and a quitclaim deed, she announced. She efficiently checked my parents' IDs, had them sign the quitclaim deed, and then embossed both documents with her official seal. The thud of the notary's stamp echoed in the silent room like a gavel. It was done. She packed up her things, I paid her fee, and she left as quickly as she had arrived. I was now holding a legally binding document that made me the owner of my home. I looked at my family. The 4 of them were still sitting there, frozen. The meeting is over, I said, my voice cool and even. You can leave now. My father stood up, his movements stiff and old. He didn't look at me. He walked to the door and opened it, then waited for my mother. She got up, pulling her cardigan tightly around herself as if she were suddenly cold. She shot me a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. I hope you're happy, Anna. You've torn this family apart. I'm not the one who committed fraud, Mom. I replied calmly. You can see yourselves out. She gasped, then hurried out the door after my father. Chloe and Liam were the last to leave. Chloe stood up, her face tear-streaked and pale. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. Anna, I didn't know they forged your name. I swear. But you knew the money was for both of us, Chloe, I said, my voice softening slightly, but not with forgiveness. It was with pity. You knew and you didn't care. You were happy to take it all. This is the consequence of that. The fantasy is over. She flinched, then turned and walked out without another word. Liam paused at the door. He looked back at me, his face a mixture of apology and disgust. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I'm sorry. I had no idea. I believe you, I said. And I did. He was just another person caught in the blast radius of my family's toxicity. But you married into this. Good luck. He gave a short, bitter nod, and then he was gone. I closed the door and leaned against it, the signed documents clutched in my hand. The silence in my cottage was no longer threatening. It was peaceful. It was mine. I walked over to the window and watched as their car pulled out of the driveway and disappeared down the street. I had done it. I had faced them down, and I had won. I had my home. I had my freedom. But as I stood there in the quiet of my new, wholly owned life, I didn't feel the elation I had expected. I just felt a deep, profound emptiness. I had lost my family. The illusion of it, anyway. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that nothing would ever be the same again. The fallout began the very next day. I woke up feeling hungover, even though I hadn't had a drop of alcohol. The adrenaline of the confrontation had worn off, leaving behind an emotional exhaustion so complete it felt physical. I made coffee and sat with the signed documents on my kitchen table, reading them over and over again. It was real. The cottage was mine. I called Maya and told her everything. She listened in stunned silence, punctuated by the occasional, "Oh my God," or "You're a legend." "So you own the house now?" she asked, her voice filled with awe. Just like that? They just signed it over? They didn't have a choice, I said, looking out my window at the main house. It looked strangely menacing in the morning light. It was either give me the cottage or face a felony charge. My dad's an accountant. He knew what was at stake. Wow, she breathed. Anna, I am so incredibly proud of you. I know how hard that must have been. It was, I admitted. It felt like I was ending something, like I was burning down my own life. You weren't burning it down, she corrected me gently. You were fumigating it. There was a pest problem and you handled it. Her words made me smile, a small, tired smile. Thanks, Maya. I needed to hear that. What happens now? She asked. I have no idea, I said honestly. I haven't heard from any of them. I imagine I won't for a while. I was wrong. The first communication came that afternoon, in the form of a text message from Chloe. Mom is a complete wreck. She hasn't stopped crying. Dad won't come out of his study. This is all your fault. You were always so jealous of me, and now you've gotten your revenge. I hope you're happy. I stared at the message, the accusation of jealousy a familiar, tired refrain. For years, any complaint I had, any boundary I tried to set, was dismissed as jealousy of Chloe. It was their go-to defense, their way of invalidating my feelings. But this time, it had no power. I typed back a simple, cold reply. This isn't about jealousy. This is about theft. Your wedding was paid for with stolen money. My money. If your mother is a wreck, it's because she got caught. I blocked her number immediately after sending it. I was done with that conversation. I was done with her. The next interaction was with my Aunt Carol. She called me that evening, her voice trembling with distress. Anna, your mother called me. She's hysterical. She said you blackmailed them? That you forced them to give you the cottage? I don't understand. My parents had already started their spin campaign. They were painting me as the villain, the cruel, vindictive daughter who had extorted her own loving family. I took a deep breath. I owed Aunt Carol the truth. She had been kind to me. She had given me the first clue. Aunt Carol, I said, my voice calm and steady. Let me tell you what really happened. I laid it all out for her. The trust from my grandparents, the $200,000, the forged signature, the ultimatum they had given me. I told her everything, without emotion, just the cold, hard facts. There was a long, stunned silence on the other end of the line. Oh, Anna, she finally whispered, her voice thick with shock and sorrow. Oh, my dear girl. I had no idea. Claire, Thomas, I can't believe it. To forge your signature, to steal from their own child. They did, I said simply. And when I confronted them with the proof, I gave them a choice. They could either face the legal consequences, or they could make it right by giving me the house, which was worth less than the money they stole. They chose the house. My God, she said. Of course they did. Oh, Anna, I am so sorry. You shouldn't have had to go through that. I'm okay, Aunt Carol, I said. And, to my surprise, I found that I was. I just wanted you to know the truth. They're going to tell everyone I'm a monster. And I need at least one person in the family to know that I'm not. You are not the monster here, sweetie, she said fiercely.
They are.
What they did is unforgivable.
I need to think about this.
I need to talk to your uncle. We ended the call, and I felt a small measure of relief. The truth was out, at least to one person who mattered. The days turned into a week. I went to the county courthouse and filed the quitclaim deed. It was official. I was a homeowner. The feeling was surreal. I walked through my small cottage, touching the walls, looking out the windows. It was mine.
Trulimine.
The sense of security was something I had never felt before. Then, about 10 days after the confrontation, I saw a for sale sign go up in front of the main house. It was a shock. I hadn't expected them to move. I thought they would just find a way to pay the mortgage, maybe by selling some assets or, God forbid, getting a job for my mother. But they were selling. They were running away. The reason why became clear a few days later when I got a call from Liam. His voice was strained. Anna, it's Liam. I'm sorry to bother you. It's okay, Liam. What's going on? I asked. It's Chloe, he said, and he sounded exhausted. She's leaving me. I was stunned. What? Why? He let out a short, bitter laugh. Why do you think? The fantasy is over, just like you said. The perfect family she sold me on turned out to be a bunch of criminals. The money, the status, it's all gone. Or it's about to be. Her parents are having to sell their house because, as it turns out, they are completely, utterly broke. They cashed out that trust fund, spent a chunk on the wedding, and apparently blew the rest on a series of terrible investments. There's nothing left. So that was the final piece of the puzzle. They weren't just immoral. They were incompetent. They had stolen our inheritance and then squandered it. The ultimatum wasn't just a cruel power play. It was an act of pure desperation from people who had hit rock bottom. She blames me, you know, Liam continued, his voice cracking. She said I sided with you because I didn't defend them at your cottage. She said I should have stood up for her family. I told her I don't stand up for criminals. That didn't go over well. She packed her bags this morning and went back to her parents. Or what's left of their home, anyway. I'm sorry, Liam, I said, and I meant it. He was a decent guy who had been caught in a trap. Don't be, he said wearily. You did me a favor. You showed me who I really married. I just wish I had seen it before I signed the marriage certificate. Our lawyers will be in touch, I guess. He hung up, and I was left staring at the for sale sign across the lawn. The perfect wedding, the perfect marriage, the perfect family, it had all disintegrated in less than a month. All because of greed and lies. A few weeks later, a moving truck pulled up to the main house. I watched from my window as my parents, looking haggard and defeated, loaded their lives into boxes. My mother never once looked in my direction. My father, however, did. As he was carrying a box of his precious accounting books to the truck, he stopped and looked directly at my cottage. Our eyes met across the lawn. His gaze was filled with a toxic mix of hatred, resentment, and, I thought, a flicker of something else. A grudging, bitter respect. He was a man who understood numbers and leverage. I had beaten him at his own game. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, then turned and heaved the box into the truck. I never saw them again. I heard from Aunt Carol that they had moved to a small, rented apartment in a town a few hours away. My father had managed to keep his job, but his spirit was broken. My mother had become a recluse. Chloe was living with them, her fairy tale life in ashes. She had tried to reconcile with Liam, but he had filed for divorce, citing fraud. Not just the financial fraud, but the fraud of the person she had pretended to be. My life, in contrast, began to blossom. The quiet of my cottage was now a source of peace, not loneliness. I planted a larger garden. I adopted a cat from the local shelter. I started a book club at the library. The money I had been paying in rent, and the money I was no longer afraid of having to pay for their mortgage, went into a savings account. For the first time, I had a real future, one that I was building for myself, on my own terms. About a year later, I was having coffee with Maya on my small patio. It was a beautiful spring day, and the flowers I had planted were in full bloom. "You seem happy, Anna," she said, smiling at me over her mug. "I am," I said, and the truth of it settled warmly in my chest.
I really am.
It was a brutal price to pay, losing my family like that. "You didn't lose them," Maya said firmly. "You surgically removed a cancer. It was painful, but it saved your life." I looked around at my little home, my sanctuary that I had fought for and won. I thought about my parents and Chloe, living in their cramped apartment, their lives defined by bitterness and regret. They had tried to make me small, to make me pay for their mistakes. But in the end, their greed had cost them everything. Their home, their reputation, their daughter's marriage, and their relationship with me. And what had it cost me? An illusion. A painful, suffocating lie I had lived with for 26 years. "You know," I said to Maya, a slow smile spreading across my face. "My dad was right about one thing. He said it was time for me to take on some real responsibility. And I did. I took responsibility for my own life. They had wanted me to pay their mortgage. They had threatened to take my home. In the end, they gave me one for free. They had taught me a valuable lesson. Sometimes, the only way to deal with family is to treat it like a business. And sometimes, the only way to find your own peace is to be willing to burn everything else to the ground." I took another sip of my coffee, the sun warm on my face. I had no regrets. I was finally free.